What if the quietest man in the room was the one who changed everything? This is the story of Captain Trayore, a man who didn't ask for permission, who led not with speeches, but with silence that struck first. From a hidden airstrip in Red Earth to the halls of Parliament, his decisions reshaped a nation's future. Burkina Faso, often overlooked, became the setting for one of the most surprising shifts in modern power. Drones, code, courage, and voices once unheard. This isn't just a story of war, it's a story of awakening. So, where are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. And if stories like these move you, subscribe to the channel, there's more coming. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The silence in the underground command room was thicker than the concrete walls around it. Red lights blinked on digital maps across the table. General Mawar didn't move. No one dared breathe until the final confirmation came through. All targets neutralized. That's when Traoré turned from the screen and said softly, "Next time, they won't even start up their engines." Not even once. Just hours before, military intelligence had intercepted chatter from mercenary channels. Encrypted, Western supplied, but not smart enough to slip past Burkina Faso's newest cybersecurity unit. The convoy was moving fast, loaded with weapons, communications gear, and high-grade explosives. Their destination, a quiet border village, known more for its cattle than combat. Traoré had heard of that village before. His grandfather was born near there. In most countries, the response would have been delayed meetings, permission slips, alliances endlessly debated. But not here. Not now. 3 days earlier, the final drone test had cleared. The engineers, young, most under 35, stood sweating in a hangar lit only by desk lamps. They had worked without sleep for 72 hours. At the center of it all stood Dr. Luma Tanari, the woman who rewrote what was possible in West African defense. Her hands were steady, her voice firm as she radioed, "Prototype Alpha cleared for full load and launch." Nobody clapped when the drone took flight. They only watched. Because for the first time, this wasn't theory. It was reality. By midnight last night, those drones, 5 in total, were in position. They hovered in silent formation. Unseen, unfelt, unnoticed. Not a single Western analyst believed Burkina Faso had that kind of range. One defense contractor in Paris even laughed during a briefing. They'd need 10 years, he said, maybe 15. They had 18 months. Back in the field, the convoy turned onto a dirt path toward a forested ridge. Perfect terrain for ambushes, but also for cover. The men inside were confident. They were backed, funded, and trained. Their orders: destabilize the area, raise flags, take a few locals hostage, and broadcast it all online. Standard terror tactics, standard silence from the international press. But this time, the silence belonged to the drones. Each UAV was equipped with AI-enhanced targeting software, guided by a hybrid algorithm partially developed in collaboration with Russian engineers. A gift? No, a partnership. Russia saw what the West overlooked, a nation ready to rise. Traoré stood behind the operators. He didn't blink. On the screen, a small red box flashed. Target acquired. He nodded. The first missile streaked from the belly of the drone, slicing through the morning air. It struck the lead vehicle head-on. Flames burst, men screamed, dust erupted into the sky. But before they could react, before they could radio for backup, the second strike dropped into the middle of the convoy. Trucks flipped, ammunition cooked off, radios crackled, then fell dead. The third drone circled above. Its shadow, barely noticeable in the sun, drifted like a ghost. It didn't need to fire again. Back in the command room, no one cheered. This wasn't a celebration. It was a line drawn in history. Traoré finally spoke. Let them report this. Let them know Africa no longer waits for anyone. Outside, in a quiet corner of the compound, a young soldier knelt beside his radio, hand trembling. He whispered, "We did it. We really did it this time." But the world would not whisper. Within hours, headlines erupted. Unknown strike eliminates Western-backed militant convoy in Burkina Faso. Precision UAV attack in West Africa raises questions about new military capabilities. Is this the birth of a new power? And as the dust settled over the borderlands, a woman in the village just beyond the strike zone lit a fire for breakfast. She looked to the sky, nodded to nothing in particular, and murmured, "They came close, but this time we were protected somehow." She didn't know how, but she didn't need to. Captain Traoré knew, and so did the world. 3 days earlier, the war room was filled with tension thick enough to slice through. The lights were dimmed, screens glowing with satellite footage and intelligence reports stacked high on the table. Outside the Ministry of Defense, the sun was still rising. But inside, the clock had already begun ticking. A junior analyst finished presenting the intercepted communication. Encrypted voice messages traced back to a cluster near the Ivory Coast border. The accents were not local, French, American. Some Boranab dialects sprinkled in, but clearly coached, manipulated. The pattern was clear. Another wave of destabilization was coming. Western fingerprints were everywhere. Yet Paris had just issued a press release denying any foreign involvement in regional unrest. Washington followed with its own boilerplate denial. Nobody in that room believed a word. Most of the generals stood silent. One leaned back, arms crossed, chewing slowly on the end of a pen. Another glanced at Traoré, waiting for his cue. They had grown used to caution, used to playing the long game. After all, this kind of threat wasn't new. For years, Burkina Faso had danced around foreign-funded insurgencies, with limited tools and even more limited allies. But then, a voice broke the silence. General Maware slapped his hand flat on the steel table. The sound echoed like gunfire through the room. His eyes burned through the blinking lights of the intel map. "They will kill our people again. This time, women and children in Toro. Then what? Another village? Another funeral?" His voice cracked under the weight of too many losses. "We sit here, we debate, and they get closer every single hour." The room tensed. No one challenged him. "Not yet, General," one of the advisors said calmly. "We don't have confirmation of movement past the river line. It could be false chatter." General Maware didn't let him finish. "They said that last time, and 73 people died. You remember that, right?" His voice softened, but only for a moment. "How many more confirmations do you really need before you let us act?" Silence again. Then Captain Traoré stood up. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice, though quiet, carried a calm that sliced through fear like a scalpel. "We are not the Burkina Faso of 2 years ago," he said, eyes locked firmly on the satellite footage. "We no longer beg for assistance. We no longer ask for permission. We build what we need. And now we use it." No one in the room moved. General Maware's eyes narrowed. "You mean the UAVs?" Traoré nodded once. An aide leaned in, almost whispering. "Sir, they're still in testing. We haven't deployed them outside simulation." "They don't need simulation anymore," Traoré replied. "They've been ready. We just weren't." For a moment, even General Mawar was stunned. He had pushed for decisive action. But even he didn't know how far Traoré had gone in secret. "Are you saying we have them online, fully loaded?" "They're already airborne," Traoré said plainly. Murmurs filled the room. A general whispered to another, "Since when?" Another stood and asked, "What kind of payload?" Traoré answered without hesitation, "Enough." General Mawar looked across the table and gave a tight nod. "Then give the order." A command officer stood holding a headset. "Sir, confirmation protocol required before targeting authorization." Traoré reached for the headset and pressed the red button on the console. A tone sounded. "Command to Falcon 1, do you see the convoy?" A voice came back, crisp and steady. "Affirmative, 12 vehicles spread across 1.6 kilometers. No civilian presence confirmed, sir." Traoré's next words were not shouted. They didn't need to be. "Proceed." He handed the headset back and walked away from the table, leaving the room in stunned silence. General Mawar finally exhaled. He stepped over to the table, placed both hands on the steel, and leaned in close to the map. The little red dots representing the convoy were still moving, but not for long. "Gentlemen," he said, looking at the other generals, "history will not remember who hesitated. Only those who truly acted." At that moment, the lights dimmed again as a second feed flickered onto the wall. The drone camera locked in. The vehicles, still unaware, crept slowly across the dirt road. Men laughing, smoking, rifles slung low. No idea that eyes from above had already marked them for elimination. The room watched in silence as the crosshairs turned from yellow to red. Then the feed went white. A deep rumble shook the speakers. Fire bloomed on the screen, like thunder in the sky. The convoy was reduced to debris within seconds. When the dust settled, General Mawar stood upright, expression hard. "Next time they send men," he said, "they better send angels instead." No one in the room dared argue. It smelled like oil, metal, and sweat. The kind of place where machines were born. Not in clean laboratories, but in converted warehouses with flickering lights and no air conditioning. In Kudugu, the old cotton storage depot had been transformed into something few could imagine. From the outside, it looked abandoned. Cracked concrete, rusted roof. But inside, it pulsed with quiet urgency. Dr. Lumatanari stood at the center of it all, sleeves rolled, her hand gripping a tablet streaked with grease. Around her, a team of 20 engineers. Some local, some from as far as Bobo Dioulasso, a few trained in Moscow and Omsk, moved like a single organism. No wasted motion, no unnecessary words, just focus. The drone prototype sat in the center of the floor, sleek and black, with sharp lines like a bird carved from night. It was larger than any commercial model, with wings extended like a hawk ready to dive. Underneath, its weapon bay had just been loaded. Luma wiped sweat from her brow and exhaled. "Fuel line is secure," said Tegan, her assistant. "Telemetry systems all green." "Optics?" she asked. "Calibrating, 6 seconds to full lock." The hum of the power system kicked in and the floor vibrated slightly. Lights blinked along the underbelly of the drone. The wall-mounted screen showed a clean boot. The code was holding, no interference, no drift. "This is not war tech," she whispered, to no one in particular. "This is survival tech, real and necessary." Tegan looked over, puzzled. "Say again?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the monitor. To her, this wasn't just hardware. It was resistance, made real. Months earlier, when Traoré first reached out to her, she thought it was a joke. She'd left the university under pressure, accused of teaching foreign methods in robotics. She refused to join French-backed projects, refused to take IMF research grants. They called her difficult. She called herself principled. But Traoré had shown up in person. He didn't wear his uniform that day, just a grey tunic and dusty boots. "I'm not asking you to build me a weapon," he said. "I'm asking you to help build a future where we don't need to ask anymore." She said yes, before he even finished speaking. Now the hangar was a living ecosystem. Power relays built from repurposed solar banks. Spare parts imported quietly through diplomatic crates. Algorithms traded with Russian partners. Not through formal agreements, but private email threads between professors and retired engineers. No one in Europe believed they could do it. No one in Africa had tried. Until now. One of the younger engineers, barely 20, stood near the stabilizer wing, checking control surfaces with trembling hands. Luma walked over and steadied him. "Take a breath," she said gently. "I don't want to be the reason it fails." "You won't be, because we all built this together, and failure is not a guest in this room." He nodded and went back to work. The tension in the air wasn't fear, it was focus. Everyone knew what was at stake. They weren't building toys. These drones would carry precision payloads into some of the most dangerous regions of the country. No room for ego. No room for error. Across the hangar, Tegan shouted, "Targeting system synced! All modules online and fully responsive!" Luma walked back to her station. She checked the code line by line. The target matrix, the GPS lock, the altitude algorithm, all stable. Then she keyed in the name of the mission. Project Jamila, named after a girl who died in a border raid last year. She was 7. Her only crime was being in the wrong place when the wrong men rolled through her village. This drone would fly in her name. Traoré called in just then. The encrypted radio crackled. "Status?" he asked. She answered without hesitation. "She's ready." He didn't reply right away. Then finally, "You've done something they all said we couldn't." Dr. Lumitanari stared at the drone, its sleek body now alive with power and purpose. "They said we'd need 10 years, she replied. "You did it in 18 months. "No," she said quietly. "We did it in a lifetime. Hours." The call ended. Outside the hangar, the sun began to set, but no one noticed. Inside, the lights brightened, the doors opened, and the drone, smooth and silent, began to rise. The runway lights flickered just once, before the field went dark again. Would you trust someone like Trayore to lead your country's defense? Amen if you'd follow a leader who builds, not begs. Out in the open plains outside Ouagadougou, a wind swept across the gravel. A single unmarked jet touched down. No announcement, no escort, no paperwork. It wasn't on any official schedule, the tower didn't even log it. But everyone in the underground hangar already knew who was inside. Dr. Lumitanari waited alone near the airstrip, her coat flapping gently in the breeze. Tegan had wanted to come, but she insisted. This wasn't about team pride or technical reports. This meeting was strategic and personal. The jet door opened without a sound. A man descended the steps carrying a worn leather case and nothing else. Medium build, grey hair, black boots, cold eyes softened only by familiarity. "Dran Velik," she said. He smiled faintly and held out his hand. "You built it faster than we did." She took his hand but didn't smile. "We didn't have a choice." Dran looked past her toward the silhouette of the hangar. "I saw the footage. Satellite caught part of the test flight. Very clean, no signature trail. That new alloy, local compound, we tested it on scrap metal in the Bobo lab." He raised an eyebrow, then nodded slowly. "Very clever, very dangerous." They started walking toward the hangar. He lowered his voice as they moved. "They will come for you now." Luma didn't slow her pace. "Let them. They won't knock. They won't send letters. It'll start with outages, then rumors, then maybe accidents." She opened the hangar door and gestured him inside. The drone stood there, powered down, resting like a beast between battles. Dran approached it carefully, as if it might wake up. He ran his fingers along the edge of the wing. "You changed the curvature, these flaps. Russian engineers argued for months to fix that problem. You just adjusted it." "We listened to the wind," she replied. He chuckled quietly. "Good answer." She turned serious again. "We didn't duplicate your designs. We rewrote the code, rebuilt the shell. Every bolt is from here." Dran nodded. "And that's why it works." A door opened in the far corner of the hangar. No guards, no announcement. Just footsteps. Captain Trayore stepped into the light, wearing civilian clothes and a pair of dusty sandals. No uniform, no medals. He didn't shake hands. He didn't bow. He simply walked up to Dran Velik and stood still for a moment. "Your weapons," he said, "have new owners now." Dran looked into his eyes and saw something few others ever did. Not defiance, not desperation, but clarity. A man who didn't want to borrow power. He wanted to end the cycle that made borrowing necessary. "They were never mine," Dran Velik replied. "Only leased to those who didn't deserve them, not truly." Trayore gave a slow nod, then looked at the drone behind him. "How many flights?" he asked, "before they try to sabotage the system?" "3, Dran said instantly. "Maybe 4. They'll pretend it's a software glitch first, then accuse you of violating some treaty. The final step will be internal. Someone you trust. Paid off, instructed to leak." "I don't want your war," Traoré said plainly. "I want to build so we never need another one again." Dran nodded. "That's why they'll be afraid of what you've made." Luma crossed her arms and leaned against the frame of the drone. "What about backup systems? You said there was a hard-coded firewall." "I brought the new module," Dran replied, tapping his case. "Unbreakable, unless they reverse engineer it from inside your own lab." She raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "Don't worry about Washington," Dran said, turning toward her. "Worry about the consultant from Geneva, the young researcher from Nairobi, the journalist who asks too many smart questions. They won't wear uniforms. but they'll be just as lethal. Traoré took the case from Dran's hand. We'll install it tonight, quietly. Then we won't need you again. I never needed to be needed, Dran said. I just needed someone who would use it better. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Traoré stepped forward. You should go now. Dran gave one last glance at the drone, then at Luma. You built something that changes the balance. No, she said. We just reminded them we're not part of their balance anymore. He left without another word. The hangar door shut behind him. Traoré turned to Luma. Are the other 3 UAVs fueled? They're in rotation, she replied. Good, he said. Deploy them, no announcements, no warnings. And the targets? Traoré looked up at the flickering light above the hangar door. They'll show themselves soon enough. The sky was quiet, but the goats had stopped moving. That was how she knew. Amia Nooré stood outside her home, barefoot in the orange dust, a blue scarf wrapped tightly around her head. Her hands gripped the wooden edge of the door, but her eyes were fixed on the tree line beyond the fields. Her son, Thilo, paced behind her, clutching a small radio transmitter, panic rising in his chest. They're close, Mama. I can hear the engines. He moved to her side. We need to leave now. We can still reach the school compound before dark. She shook her head once, gently. No. He stepped in front of her, voice louder this time. They killed 9 people in Zoudawan. They burned the clinic. They didn't even spare children. Her eyes didn't waver. This is my home. I have buried your father here. I will not run again. Thilo's hands trembled around the radio. It was an old model, used for livestock check-ins, barely strong enough to reach the district guard. But last week, during the funeral of a neighbor, he had managed to tune into the military band. He wasn't supposed to. The frequency was restricted, but curiosity and desperation pushed him to listen. Now it was the only link between this village and something greater. He turned the dial slowly, static, then voices. Command Falcon 2 holding pattern, awaiting confirmation. He pressed the talk button, knuckles white. This is Civilian Post 38. Militia trucks seen heading toward Bontierregu, 3 kilometers out. I repeat, militia trucks inbound. Silence. Then another voice broke through, calm and firm. Identify yourself. I'm no one, Thilo said, but my mother won't leave and they'll be here in minutes. He looked over. Amia Nooré had sat down on a wooden stool, hands folded. Her lips moved, not in fear but in prayer. Copy that, said the voice. Stay off frequency. Hold your position. Back in the underground command center, the transmission wasn't ignored. A junior officer flagged it immediately. The report aligned with a heat signature they had just confirmed. 12 trucks moving fast, fanning out along a narrow road lined with farm plots and mud homes. The room fell into rapid motion. Get Falcon 2 back into strike zone, barked Commander Arumo. Divert Falcon 3 to intercept angle. At the launch console, countdown protocols began. 30 seconds. Back in the village, Thilo didn't know if they'd heard him. The radio was silent now. He turned back toward his mother. Mama, please, at least go to the well shelter. She smiled faintly. I've carried water from that well every day of my life. If today is my last, it will not be spent hiding from boys with guns. He fell to his knees beside her, gripping her arm. They'll shoot anyone. They don't ask questions. I am not a question, she said, her voice steady. I am the answer that will remain when they are gone. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. Just knelt beside her in the dust. 10 seconds. In the sky above, the first drone cut through the clouds, without sound. Below it, a convoy of vehicles passed under thick canopies of trees. They were relaxed, confident. One of them threw a can out the window and laughed. There were no aircraft alarms, no radar pings. Their sponsors had assured them Burkina Faso couldn't strike from the sky. 3 seconds. The UAV's targeting system acquired full lock. 2 trucks were carrying explosives. 1 had radio jammers. All 3 were prioritized. Final confirmation. Then came the launch. From above, a single flash. From the ground, only thunder. Fire exploded through the convoy, scattering metal and men across the road. The second blast ripped through the central vehicle. By the time the dust settled, nothing moved. Tilo lifted his head. Far in the distance, a black pillar of smoke rose, like a silent flag. He stood slowly. Amia Nore rose beside him. "They are gone," she said. He looked at her, still trembling. "How did you know?" She didn't answer. She just walked forward, past the goats, past the well, into the field. The air was clearer now, lighter, like something had lifted off their land. And hundreds of miles away, in the control room, the voice on the radio whispered to no one in particular. "A mother saved a village today." In the heart of Ouagadougou, beneath a reinforced military compound, the UAV control room buzzed with restrained intensity. No shouting, no chaos, just focus. Blue screens reflected off the operators' faces, every eye fixed on the incoming feed. Commander Arumo stood at the center, arms crossed, jaw tight. The room smelled of recycled air and tension. Rows of operators sat in disciplined silence. Fingers glided over keyboards, switching between camera angles, thermal overlays, and terrain maps. No one checked phones. No one blinked more than necessary. On the main screen, the convoy appeared. 12 trucks, flatbed and armored, cutting across scrubland near the Ivory Coast border. They traveled in a staggered formation, smart enough to avoid clustering, but foolish enough to believe no one could see them. Dust kicked up behind them, like a serpent's tail. Inside the lead truck, one man stood through the sunroof, laughing with a cigarette in his mouth. "Falcon 1 visual lock confirmed," said a technician. "Canu and 3 holding at 15,000 feet. "Awaiting orders," another chimed in. Commander Oromo stepped forward. The light from the screen painted his features in shades of war and resolve. His voice, when it came, was low and deliberate. "Maintain silence. Let them believe they are safe for now." The hum of electric rotors vibrated through the speakers. The drones moved like shadows across the sky. Invisible to ground radar, untouched by noise. No jet roar, no sonic trail, just precision in motion. "Telemetry?" asked Commander Arumo. "Green across all systems," came the reply. "No deviation. Wind at 4 knots. Zero signal interference." He nodded once. A junior officer, barely out of university, leaned closer to her screen. "Commander, they're not even scanning. They truly think they're clear." Commander Arumo didn't smile. He just whispered, "Then let them laugh, for now." From the drone's point of view, the target's expressions were clear. Men in camouflage leaned on their rifles, some sharing jokes, others asleep in the back of the transport. They had looted a gas station hours earlier and believed they were ghosts in the terrain. One of them waved his rifle at a passing bird. Above them, that same bird flew just beneath Falcon 2. "Mark primary targets," ordered Commander Arumo. "Vehicle 6 is carrying jammers. Vehicle 4 has heavy arms. Prioritize engine block. Driver side. Confirmed. Coordinates locked. Payload 2 precision strike warheads. Visual range clear. No civilians in radius." The commander placed both hands on the table in front of him. A silence settled over the room, like a final breath before a funeral. He spoke the words without force, but with weight. "May our ancestors guide their flight." A red light blinked once. Then the drones adjusted formation. Falcon 1 descended slightly, angling east for a cleaner line. Falcon 2 climbed higher, shifting to account for wind drift. Falcon 3 hovered at standby, its optics narrowing in. 30 seconds to optimal range," said the lead operator. No one moved. The screen now displayed the targets from above, 12 moving dots, heat signatures glowing red and yellow. The infrared locked in. 15 seconds. In the truck, one of the militants adjusted his radio. Static. He hit it a few times, annoyed. Another man laughed and tossed a fruit peel out the window. 5 seconds. The screen flashed red. Falcon 1 launch confirmed. The room didn't cheer. It didn't blink. A single streak of light burst from the drone, cutting through the clouds like a silent vow. There was no sound in the control room. only breath held. Then, impact. The first explosion bloomed like fire opening its eyes. Vehicle 6 disappeared under a wave of flame and dust. Metal flew in every direction. Screams echoed briefly, before being swallowed by shock. Falcon 2 launched next. The second missile struck the third truck mid-turn. The tires lifted, the cabin split. 2 men were thrown 20 feet before the screen faded to smoke. Falcon 3 circled above, watching. There was nothing left to hit. In the room, the screen zoomed out. The entire convoy was stalled. Fire spread from vehicle to vehicle, ammunition cooked off, like angry sparks in the brush. And in the distance, the village they were headed for stood untouched. "Confirm final sweep," said Commander Arumo. "All targets eliminated, no non-combatants within 2 kilometers, UAVs returning to base." He exhaled slowly. "Good. Let them sleep tonight." As the drones glided silently back toward home, one of the operators turned to Commander Arumo. "Sir, do you think they'll try again?" Commander Arumo didn't look away from the screen. "They always try again." He paused, then added quietly, "But now they know. We do not wait any more." The morning sun rose over a different landscape. Once a path carved by armed convoys, the dirt road now lay in silence, littered with twisted metal and blackened debris. What had been 12 moving vehicles filled with armed men and Western-grade equipment had been reduced to a smoldering field of wreckage. Captain Selu led the response team in, his boots crunched over fragments of melted steel and scorched earth. The team fanned out, rifles ready, but they knew no one was left to fight. They weren't here for combat. They were here for confirmation. A crackling radio lay half buried under a piece of armor plating. It buzzed weakly with static, then played a broken message, in a voice half choked by confusion and fear. "Where are they? Where did they go?" Captain Selu bent down, picked it up, and handed it to a tech officer. "Log it. Keep the tape clean." The drone strike had been exact, surgical, every vehicle targeted, no collateral. Not a single tree outside the strike zone had been touched, and most importantly, the nearby village, the one marked for takeover, was unharmed. Children were seen playing in the fields by noon. Selu walked through what had once been the lead truck. He found remnants of heavy artillery. French-built. The labels were worn but unmistakable. Not government issue, private contractor. Next to it, burnt scraps of field manuals, some in English, some in Polish. The tactical layouts mirrored NATO training patterns. Every move the convoy had made followed classic Western special ops doctrine. Their spacing, their route, even their rest points. But none of that helped them. When the sky opened, a soldier waved him over. "Sir, we found this near the third vehicle." It was a wristwatch. High-frequency signal jammer embedded inside. State-of-the-art. NATO certified. Its battery was still warm. It hadn't jammed a thing. Selu turned to the tech officer again. "Scan the frequencies. Any evidence we were being monitored?" No signs of counter-surveillance, nothing bounced off their jammers. They weren't broadcasting, they didn't expect to be hunted. The team continued. One soldier found a sat phone, charred beyond recognition. Another retrieved a sidearm engraved with a private security logo. Nothing official, nothing traceable. But all of it, unmistakably Western. A quiet hum filled the air again. Not drones this time. Wind pushing through the acacia trees nearby. The field was still warm from impact, but the soldiers moved calmly. There was no rush, no panic. The job had been done before they arrived. They were walking through history, not war. Selu paused at the outer edge of the wreckage. He looked back, taking it all in. What used to be a threat had been vaporized in seconds. No shots fired from the ground. No injuries to his men, no last stands, just silence and smoke. Commander Arumo was right, he muttered. "What's that, sir?" asked the young lieutenant beside him. "They're not coming with boots anymore," Selu said. "Now they send ghosts, mercenaries, contractors, disguises, and we have to fight them with—" He interrupted himself. "With brains, with precision, with silence." That strikes first. He looked up at the sky. Clear. Open. No sign of the machines that had rewritten the terms of war. Another soldier approached. We found encrypted drives, could take days to crack. Tag everything, no delays, Selu said. Then he turned to his comms officer. Send a coded update to command, phrase it exactly. Camp neutralized, precision confirmed. No civilian impact. Ghosts didn't see it coming. The officer nodded and relayed the message. As the team prepared to move out, one last voice came through the recovered radio, this time from a distant operator trying to re-establish contact with the now-dead convoy. Team Alpha, respond. Status check. Repeat, status check. Team Alpha? There was no reply. Only wind. Selu left the radio where it was and walked back to his truck. On the side panel of the convoy, someone had scrawled words in faded chalk days earlier. A phrase meant to intimidate. We own the night. Selu shook his head. Not anymore. The phone rang before sunrise. In the heart of Ouagadougou, inside the Foreign Ministry's most secure office, a red line console blinked once. Then again. The assistant hesitated, then picked up the receiver. Encrypted call. Paris, high level, she said, holding it out. Minister Garo Sefu glanced toward Captain Trayore, who sat across the table reviewing a preliminary report on the UAV strike. Traoré didn't look up. Take it here. Sefu placed the receiver to his ear. This is Burkina Faso. The voice on the other end was tight and unmistakably French. This is Ambassador Séverin. We need to speak now. You are speaking. What did you just use in the south? Séverin asked, cutting to the point. Our satellites picked up signatures we've never seen from your sector. Heat trails from non-NATO systems. Stealth drones with payloads beyond your declared capacity. Where did you get that equipment? Sefu kept his voice flat. We neutralized an illegal convoy of armed militants attempting to cross our southern border. We know who they were, Séverin snapped. That's not the issue. The issue is how you did it. Captain Trayore raised his eyes. Sefu passed the phone across the table. He took it, calmly. This is Captain Trayore speaking. There was a beat of hesitation on the other end. Captain, with respect, this is not how regional coordination works. You were expected to communicate such deployments through appropriate channels. This was not authorized. It violates nothing, Traoré interrupted. They were armed. They were foreign-backed. They were headed for our villages. We acted. You acted using technology not sanctioned by any West African defense protocol. No, we acted using technology you refused to share for years. Every time we asked for satellite support, you redirected us to peacekeeping requests. Every time we asked for counter-drone capabilities, you offered training seminars and second-hand rifles. Now, we don't ask. There was a long silence. You've been in contact with Moscow. Traoré didn't answer that. We saw the algorithm patterns. The signature cloaking. That design doesn't come from Bobo Dioulasso. It comes from Moscow. We built it here, Traoré said. With help, yes, but the hands, the minds, the vision, that was ours. You didn't believe we could. You told us we'd always need you. That our safety required your structure, your timetable, your permission. Severin's tone shifted. Captain, this escalates things. This creates tension. We have regional military advisors who are watching. Good. Traoré said. Let them watch. Let them understand the new rules. You're destabilizing the balance. Traoré let out a quiet breath. That balance, it cost us children, villages, and years of delay. You funded training for peacekeepers, but not for engineers. You gave us paperwork instead of payloads. You sent condolences while we buried our dead. Now that we've built the tools ourselves, you call it destabilization. You're playing a dangerous game. No. Traoré said. We're ending one. There was a pause, then a shift in the French ambassador's tone, more controlled now, almost mechanical. This will be noted in Brussels and in Washington. It already has been, Traoré said. The ambassador tried once more. There's still space for cooperation, if you're willing to engage in open frameworks. I am, when they respect sovereignty. Captain, the line clicked. Traoré handed the phone back to Sefu, who said nothing. He stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the first sliver of sunlight breaking across the horizon. In the corner of the room, the assistant whispered, "Should we notify the Russian desk?" "No need," Seifu replied. "They already know." Trayore turned from the window. "Tell the ministry to prepare a public statement. One sentence." He paused, then spoke clearly. "We protect what is ours, with or without their approval." The town of Sinindu had not seen war, but it had come close. Too close. The morning after the drone strike, the village woke not to screams or flames, but to stillness. It was a strange silence. Not the kind of fear that usually followed the sound of gunfire, but the silence that comes after something passes you by, like a bullet you didn't even know was meant for you. The elders gathered first. No one called them. They simply showed up, one by one, at the edge of the old communal square. It was where the last funeral had been held, years ago, after bandits raided a wedding caravan just 15 kilometers north. That memory still lived in the soil. But this time, there were no bodies, no blood, no wails of grief. Instead, there were candles. Women arrived, carrying small bowls of water and salt. The children didn't understand at first, but followed anyway. The men came in silence, heads bowed as if mourning something they couldn't quite name. Someone lit the first candle and placed it on a flat stone in the center of the square. "We are not lighting this for the dead," said old Mama Lali, her voice dry as cracked bark. "We are lighting this for the ones who would have died, but didn't." They placed stones on the ground in a circle. 12 of them, one for each truck destroyed in the strike, one for each thread of death that never made it to their door. A young girl named Serenadari stood beside her mother and whispered, "But Mama, why do we cry for people who didn't die?" Her mother pulled her close. "Because this time," she said, "we were faster." The phrase caught. It passed from mouth to mouth. We were faster, not stronger, not more brutal, just faster, smarter, prepared. For once, the hunters were the ones who never made it to the hunt. In the small clay church that stood at the top of the hill, the bell rang once, then again. Not the full toll of mourning, just 2 slow chimes, enough to acknowledge what could have been. In the crowd, a former teacher named Biren Jari stepped forward. He placed a folded paper in the center of the candle ring. On it were the names of 20 villagers who were meant to be taken. If the convoy had arrived, women, farmers, children, every name matched a door in the village. The radio had warned them just in time, and the strike, like thunder from the sky, had ended it before it began. A woman named Iba Nora, who had lost her husband to a similar raid 5 years ago, stood still for a long moment, then knelt and pressed her forehead to the ground. No one stopped her. The imam arrived quietly. He didn't speak, just nodded to the elders and began a soft recitation under his breath. A few Christian leaders stood nearby and joined in silent prayer. There was no ceremony, no order of service, just shared breath and trembling relief. Later, as the sun rose higher, a boy climbed a tree and tied a small cloth to the top branch. It had no symbol, just brown fabric, but it fluttered in the wind like a banner, not a victory, but survival. Would you trust Traore's vision if it saved your village too? Share your thoughts below and comment Amen if you support him. Underneath it, an old man with a cane turned to a passing youth and asked, "What are we doing?" The boy thought for a second, then answered, "Giving thanks." The man smiled faintly. "Good, let them hear us in silence." Hours later, when a patrol unit passed through the area, they saw the circle of candles still burning. Some had gone out in the breeze, but most remained. Around them were footprints, handprints, scraps of cloth. And in the center, untouched, the list of names. No one had dared take it. The officer snapped a photo and sent it back to command. The caption read, "No casualties." But they buried something anyway. And that night, across the region, other villages held similar moments. No one declared a holiday, no orders were sent. But something passed. From heart to heart, from house to house. This time, we were faster. The room wasn't large, but it was packed. Journalists elbowed their way toward the front. Camera shutters clicking, notebooks flipping, translators murmuring into headsets. The government had announced an urgent press conference. No warning, no location hint, just a single word: breakthrough. At the center of the table stood Dr. Luma Tanari, flanked by two of her lead engineers. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, no political badge. Just a dark blue shirt, oil stains faintly visible at the cuffs. She looked out across the crowd, Western and African press alike, and adjusted the mic. "My name is Dr. Luma Tanari," she said calmly, "lead coordinator for the Jamila UAV project. You may have seen our work." That got a few nervous chuckles, but she didn't smile. "Let me be absolutely clear from the start. The drones that eliminated the southern convoy last week were designed, coded, tested, and launched entirely by Burkina hands." A murmur ran through the room. Several reporters leaned forward. One from Reuters raised her hand. "With all due respect, that level of precision doesn't happen without external military-grade systems. Who gave you targeting protocols?" Dr. Tanari didn't flinch. "Yes, we had help, but the hands were ours, the code was ours, the risk that it was ours. And the reason it worked wasn't because someone handed us a playbook. It worked because we stopped waiting for permission." CNN's West Africa correspondent cut in. "Are you confirming collaboration with Russia? Intelligence suggests some of the stealth modifications came from SS." "We received advice," she said, "but advice does not build drones. Advice doesn't teach a girl from Koudagou how to weld titanium. Advice does not write 700,000 lines of code at 3 a.m. under lantern light, when the power cuts out." A French reporter stood abruptly. "So, you admit it's Russian tech?" "No," she said. "I admit it's African sovereignty. And you're uncomfortable with how fast it happened." The room froze. A local reporter from Bobo Dioulasso stood next. "Dr. Tanari, was there a moment you knew it would work?" She looked at her team, then back at the podium. "The first test flight didn't go well. We lost altitude. We misread the thermals. Everyone told us we needed more Western oversight. But one of our engineers, he was just 17 at the time, rewrote the stabilization script entirely from scratch. On paper, that flight made it. And that's when I knew, not because we had all the tools, but because we had no more excuses left to hide behind." Someone from the BBC shouted from the back, "How long before these drones are exported? Is this the beginning of a new arms race in West Africa?" She leaned into the mic. "No, this is not a race. It's a return. A return to what we were always capable of, before we were told otherwise." An Italian defense analyst whispered to his neighbor, "They'll get sanctioned for this." She heard it. She responded anyway. "Let them sanction us," she said. "Sanctions don't stop mines. They just make us build faster." The room erupted. Hands shot up, cameras rolled, questions flew. But she raised one finger, and the room hushed. "You asked who gave us targeting tech," she said. "Who opened the door?" Then she smiled, not smug, not angry, just proud. "Africa gave itself permission." No one spoke after that, not right away. A few tried to scribble their way back into control. Others whispered about diplomatic fallout, but the truth was already out. And she hadn't needed clearance from anyone to say it. Later that evening, the footage aired across several networks. Most cut out the middle and only aired the line about Russia. A few buried the story entirely. But in classrooms across Burkina Faso, young girls downloaded the full video. Teachers rewound her final sentence and played it twice. And in labs, from Bamako to Kinshasa, new teams gathered. Engineers, coders, builders, and they all heard the same thing. Africa gave itself permission. Sarah Nadari had just returned from a briefing with the East African delegation when the knock came at her office door. It wasn't loud, just two soft taps. She looked up from her stack of notes on renewable energy policy, slightly irritated, until she saw who stood there. It was Eline Tova, not a diplomat, not officially, just listed as a regional analyst on the French embassy roster, but they'd once shared a dorm room during a UN training program in Geneva, years ago. They studied late into the night, dreamed of fixing systems too old to reform. Those nights felt far away now. Eileen stepped in, eyes serious. "No one saw me come in," she whispered. "This isn't a visit. It's a favor." Seren tensed. A favor? Or a warning? Eileen reached into her coat pocket and handed her a small folded sheet of thick white paper. Seren opened it. Just one line was printed, in plain black type. "Shut the drones down or we'll shut down your grid." No name, no date, no watermark. Seren's fingers gripped the paper tightly, her heart thudding in her chest. "You brought this yourself?" "They didn't ask me to," Eileen said. "But they'll know I did." Seren studied her old friend for a long moment. "Why?" "Because I know you're not a puppet. And because I don't think they care about collateral damage the way you clearly do." She didn't say more. She turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind her. Seren didn't call security. She didn't run to the ministry director. She simply sat still for a long moment, staring at the line of text as if it might somehow change if she read it again. Then she folded it carefully and slipped it into a folder marked Domestic Agricultural Reform. 30 minutes later, she stood outside Captain Traoré's private office at the presidential compound. He was reading, always reading. A thick journal filled with handwritten notes sat beside him. When she entered, he didn't look up. "I assume this is urgent," he said. She placed the paper on his desk. He read it once. Then he reached for the candle that sat in the corner of his desk. Wax half melted, flame steady. He held the paper over it. It caught quickly, curling into ash without a sound. Seren said nothing. "They will not stop," Traoré said softly, still watching the flame. "Not because of drones, not because of guns, not even because we win." He looked up at her now. "They will stop when we stop needing them." Seren nodded slowly. "And until then?" "Until then," he said, "we build, quietly, bravely, without fear." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "They'll try to cut more than our power. Banks, satellites, comm lines. They already have," he said, "but they don't understand yet. We've survived longer without them than they've existed." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the horizon. Sunlight touched the edge of the compound walls. "Tell the engineers to finish the backup servers," he said. "Air-gap them, no exceptions. Keep everything physical, make them absolutely unhackable. It'll slow our response time," Seren Adari warned. "It'll keep our dignity intact," Traoré replied. Seren nodded again. "And the foreign ministry?" "Stay silent for now," he said. "We answer with function, not noise or headlines." She turned to leave, but he called after her. "Seren." She stopped. "You've always believed, truly believed, we could speak truth in rooms built to mute us." "I still do," she said gently. "Good," he said. "But now we speak it through silence and through steel." She walked back to her office, composed but shaken. That night, the presidential compound switched briefly to offline mode. No outside signals, no digital traffic. Everything routed through physical nodes deep underground. In a hallway lit by low bulbs, Seren passed a technician carrying 2 laptops wrapped in cloth. No markings, no cloud sync, just local tools. At her desk, she opened her drawer and pulled out a photo from years ago. Her and Eileen Tova on a balcony in Geneva, arms linked, smiling like the world might actually listen to them someday. She turned the photo face down, then got back to work. The alarm went off at 12:17 a.m. A single sharp siren sliced through the stillness of the compound. Red lights flared along the interior walls of the hangar in Kudugu. The engineers scrambled from their sleeping quarters beside the lab, grabbing radios, flashlights, and sidearms. Tegan was the first to reach the entry gate. A guard raised his fist. Silent signal. Movement confirmed inside the restricted drone bay. By 12:21, they had him. Pinned beneath 2 security officers, the intruder struggled briefly, then froze. He didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't demand a name. He said nothing. His face was young, maybe mid-20s. Thin, clean-shaven with a foreign ID tag tucked awkwardly in his waistband. A tech uniform from an NGO operating out of Accra. When the drone room lights flicked back on, the team found what he'd been trying to do. A small USB device, loaded with corrupt code, half inserted into the drone's central diagnostics port. Another 30 seconds, and the targeting matrix would have been scrambled beyond repair. Dr. Luma Tanari arrived 10 minutes later. She didn't ask to speak to him. She didn't even look at him directly when she entered the holding room. She stood behind the mirrored glass and watched as the interrogation began. The saboteur sat with his hands cuffed to the table. He looked straight ahead. Sweat glistened on his brow. He wasn't frightened. He looked lost. A military officer stepped forward. Name, Nami Dekar. Affiliation? No answer. Another question. Who sent you? Speak clearly. Silence. Then finally, a whisper. They said it wasn't ours. The officer leaned in. Who said that, exactly? Nami stared down at his fingers. At the Institute, during training in Europe, they told us we weren't ready. That if we tried to build this kind of power ourselves, it would destroy us. That only certain countries should ever control that level of precision. He chuckled once, but it cracked midway through. They laughed when I said I wanted to come back, told me I'd be fixing farm drones, monitoring rainfall. The officer didn't speak. Let him go on. They said we couldn't handle the consequences of building weapons, that it would make us targets, that we'd provoke something we couldn't contain. You still haven't answered. Why you did it? Nami looked up, for the first time. Because I believed them. Dr. Tanari, behind the glass, didn't move. Her hands folded tightly in front of her, her eyes locked on the man she didn't know but understood too well. She turned to Tegan beside her. They didn't need to send an army, she said. Just a voice. Tegan looked shaken. He's one of ours. No, she said. He was trained to believe otherwise. In the hangar, the rest of the team gathered around the drone to assess the damage. Fortunately, the fail-safes had kicked in. The firmware hadn't been breached, but the breach attempt was clear. They had been warned, yes. But now it was real. Dr. Tanari stepped into the room. Nami looked up, eyes narrowing. You're her. I am, she replied. You really built it. She didn't answer him. He leaned forward, searching for something, anything in her face. They told me if I didn't stop you, someone else definitely would. That you'd bring war to our doorstep. She stepped closer to the table. They lied to you, she said softly. They really lied to you. You didn't just stop war. You tried to break the only tool we've ever had to stop it ourselves. He didn't speak. You know what scares the most? She asked quietly, her voice barely rising. Not that we built a drone, but that we actually believed we could. He lowered his eyes. She turned and walked out. Back in the hangar, she gathered her team. From now on, she said firmly, no systems online without two-factor physical authentication at minimum. No foreign tech inside this compound. No exception. I don't care if it's a laptop or a flashlight. Tegan nodded. And the firmware? Someone asked. We rewrite it, she said again, slowly, line by line from scratch. It'll take weeks. Then we work through the night. She looked at the empty drone in front of her, the same one Nami had tried to corrupt. It still stood tall. Still untouched at its core, she added. They're not just trying to stop our machines, she said. They're trying to infect our minds, but we don't let them. And the team, tired but burning with something deeper than fatigue, got back to work. The headlines came fast. First from Paris, then London, then Washington. Images of the scorched convoy captured on satellite and leaked by a foreign defense analyst splashed across every major outlet. Burkina Faso deploys advanced military drones. West African nation takes combat capabilities to a new level. A dangerous shift. Who armed the Sahel? CNN aired a 90-second segment looping infrared footage of the strike. Their anchor called it a show of force few expected. The camera zoomed in on the moment just before missile impact. Then abruptly, the heat signature vanished. The host blinked, and then it disappeared. That vanishing point became the obsession of global intelligence agencies. By morning, analysts in Langley and Brussels had requested full frame-by-frame analysis. They found that the drones didn't just cloak, their thermal visibility collapsed mid-flight. From one moment to the next, they became invisible to every known satellite system, Western or otherwise. At first, the assumption was foreign backing, Russian stealth tech, Chinese optical deflection, but none of the patterns matched. The coating didn't reflect, bend, or refract light. It simply absorbed and diffused heat beyond trackable levels. No one could replicate the signature until someone traced a small academic paper published 6 months earlier in French, posted on a nearly forgotten research blog run by engineering students at the University of Bobo-Dioulasso. Title: Microceramic Coatings for Subtropical Temperature Regulation in Lightweight UAVs. Author: Mariam Bailar, age 22. The blog had no tags, no funding links, no references to military application, just a series of tests on ceramic blends using clay charcoal powder and a mineral compound found in local riverbeds. 3 days later, the article was taken offline. But it was too late. The world had already named it the African Leap. News outlets scrambled. They wanted to know who funded it, who approved it, who allowed students to develop stealth tech rivaling NATO labs. But there were no contracts, no government memos. Just students solving overheating problems in drone wings by trial and error, stumbling into one of the most important thermal breakthroughs in modern warfare. Inside the Ministry of Defense, a meeting was called. Captain Trayore sat at the head of the table, a copy of Mariam Bailar's paper printed and bound in his hands. He didn't speak for a long time. He just read the report again, silently. Across from him, Dr. Luma Tanari nodded. They weren't trying to build weapons, just solving problems. And they solved one the entire Western defense industry hasn't solved. Serenadari, flipping through her own copy, interrupted. Are they safe? Trayore asked. They're under protection now, Tanari said. They don't even know yet what they've done. He leaned back, thoughtful. We won't hide them, but we won't parade them either. Let the world guess. A military advisor shifted uncomfortably. Sir, this is genuinely going to bring more attention, he said. They'll say we're escalating dangerously now. They'll even say we've crossed into full militarization, the advisor added, voice low but firm. Captain Trayore placed the report on the table. We've crossed into self-respect now, he replied, quietly but clearly. The advisor fell silent. In Bobo-Dioulasso, Amia Noure sat on her small balcony with her notebook open, confused by the sudden disappearance of her article and the increase in strange friend requests from European names she didn't recognize. She hadn't seen the news. Her internet had been spotty all week. She just knew her clay samples worked better than expected, and she wanted to test them on solar panels next. Back on international airwaves, debate raged. Should the EU intervene in West African drone development? Has Burkina Faso crossed a red line? Who's next? But inside Burkina Faso, pride rose without permission. In classrooms, professors rewrote curriculum overnight. In radio shows, engineers were interviewed like athletes. In markets, vendors discussed our drones as they discussed football scores. And in every corner of the country, one phrase passed from mouth to mouth. They didn't see it coming. Not the strike, not the silence, and definitely not the science. At 5:11 a.m., the final convoy crossed the tree line near the Co River. 12 vehicles, armored and loaded. 2 carried jamming towers. 1 hauled a mobile command node with encrypted satellite feeds. The rest transported fighters, most not local, many speaking in clipped military French over unlicensed frequencies. At 5:17, Burkina Faso's cyber defense unit intercepted the message. They won't strike again, a voice said through static. Too much attention now. The drones are just a bluff. It was the last mistake they would make. Inside the command center, the atmosphere was electric but still. Operators sat upright, lights were dimmed, systems active but muted. And standing behind the main table, wearing no uniform, no rank, no visible expression, was Captain Ibrahim Trayore. He had arrived 2 hours earlier, unannounced. No ceremony, no speech, just a single instruction. I'll guide this one. Commander Arumo had stepped aside without question. At 5:20, Falcon 1, 2, and 3 were activated. Silent wings lifted into the pink morning sky. They needed no launch pad, they needed no fanfare, they knew their path. Trayore stood behind the targeting officer. Bring up thermal feed, filter out civilian zones. Confirmed, no heat clusters near the target corridor. Good. Engage triple lock sequence, fire at will. The UAVs responded instantly. Falcon 1 dipped low, adjusting for wind drift. Falcon 2 maintained altitude. Falcon 3 slowed to reposition for a lateral strike. Each drone had one target. No overlaps, no hesitation. At 5:23, the first missile hit. Vehicle 6 erupted in a plume of fire and metal. The convoy panicked, braking hard. Some swerved into ditches. Radio chatter surged, frantic, confused. Ready! Reposition! Scatter! They didn't get far. At 5:25, the second strike came. The mobile command truck vanished in a silent burst. No fire, just disintegration. The jamming tower short-circuited before it could activate. Sparks rained over the nearby brush. Inside the command room, Traore's voice stayed level. Falcon 3, confirm final payload delivery. Target acquired. Strike window in 5 seconds. He nodded once. At 5:28, the third and final impact landed. The last vehicle, a transport truck carrying heavy munitions, ignited like a furnace. The blast shook the outer edges of the forest, but the fire never touched the nearby villages. The perimeter held. The strike was perfect. Then silence. No return fire, no survivors on satellite, no engine signals, just smoke drifting into the wind. The entire operation had lasted 14 minutes. Trayore stepped back from the table. Stand down all units. Confirm local peacekeeper patrol within the hour, he ordered. Commander Arumo nodded and issued the command promptly. One operator turned from her console. So do we confirm message delivery to external parties? She asked. No, Traoré replied, softly but firmly. Let the wreckage speak. Outside, the first call to prayer began to echo through the city. Children stirred in their homes. Women prepared millet by the fire. Markets opened, life moved forward. They would never know how close death had come that morning, but they would feel something else, a ripple of clarity inside the Ministry of Information. Foreign press requests flooded the inbox. Paris wanted comment. Washington requested a closed briefing. Nairobi asked for confirmation. None were answered. Instead, Trayore walked alone into the archive room behind the command center. He removed a single folder, opened it, and added one handwritten line at the bottom of a document marked high-risk Western-backed incursions. Resolved Como route. Outcome: no survivors. He placed the file back and left the room. In the hours that followed, satellite images circulated quietly between embassies and defense ministries. Aerial views of a burned convoy. 0 civilian damage. No stray hits. One nation fully in control of its airspace. An analyst in Brussels wrote one sentence in her report. This is not just defense. This is judgment. The sun was already high when the motorbike arrived. Its engine rumbled quietly before cutting out in front of the small clay house near the center of the village. Dust swirled behind the wheels. A man in a navy uniform stepped off, helmet tucked under his arm, and approached the doorway with careful steps. Amir Noure sat under the shade of a neem tree, peeling cassava slowly, rhythmically. She looked up without surprise. Her eyes had seen many uniforms in her life. Some had brought sorrow, others silence, but this one, she noticed, held no weapon, only an envelope. Madame Amir Noor, he asked respectfully. She nodded once. This is for you, from the Ministry of Defense. He bowed slightly and handed her the envelope sealed in wax, her name handwritten in firm black ink. She turned it over slowly, felt the weight of it, and said nothing. The man didn't wait. He got back on his motorbike, started the engine, and rode away. She sat with the envelope in her lap for a long while. Chickens pecked in the distance. Her son Tilo was away at the school building, helping repaint the windows. No one disturbed her. Finally, she broke the seal. Inside was a certificate for acts of civilian bravery and dedication to the nation's protection. It bore the emblem of the Defense Ministry, 2 signatures, and a gold embossed stamp at the bottom. But it wasn't the certificate that stopped her breath. It was the photo underneath, black and white, printed on thick card. It showed the control room from above. Screens glowing, operators focused. And in the center, a waveform displayed across a monitor. A voice recording. Her voice. The caption beneath read, "Final audio mark used to time strike one. Village protected, lives saved." She covered her mouth. The memory rushed back. That moment when she'd whispered to her son, telling him not to run, when she had insisted on staying, when her voice over a weak radio reached someone miles away. She hadn't known they were listening. She hadn't known that in those seconds her voice had become a guide. She didn't weep loudly. There was no need. Just a steady stream of tears rolling down her cheeks as she sat still under the neem tree. The cassava peeled itself beneath her hands. The wind rustled gently around her shoulders. Not grief, not regret, but pride. She rose slowly and walked into the house. She placed the certificate on the wooden shelf beside a photo of her late husband and the faded Quran he used to read. She stood a moment longer, then placed the black and white photo behind the glass of the single window, letting the light touch it. Later that day, Tila returned home with paint on his sleeves and dirt on his shoes. He saw the paper on the shelf and froze. "What's this?" he asked softly. She handed it to him. He read the certificate 3 times. His fingers tightened around the edges of the paper. "You never told me," he said quietly. "I didn't know either," she replied softly. "Not until today." He walked to the window and looked at the waveform photo. "That's you." She nodded. "They heard me, and they listened." That night after dinner, they sat outside by the fire. Neighbors passed by, offering greetings, unaware of what she held inside the house. She didn't mention it. She didn't need to. But one old man passing by with a cane paused and said, "You look taller today, Amia." She smiled. "Maybe I finally stood up straight." He laughed gently and moved on. Tilo looked at her. "You think they'll ever tell the whole country?" he asked. She shook her head. "It's enough. They told me." In the weeks to come, more letters arrived in other villages. Not awards, not headlines, just quiet acknowledgements. A girl in Kanugu received a thank you note for mapping out unfamiliar roads. A nurse in Benora received a message saying her supply reports had prevented a wrong drone strike. None of them had expected recognition. None had asked for it. But they had acted, and someone had seen. And in every house that received a letter, a new kind of silence settled. Not the silence of fear, but the stillness that comes when your voice, soft, brave, ordinary, has shaped the future. Bandenoy, Part 16, the assembly that voted in silence. Parliament meets. No applause, no protests. Just a bill. The Autonomous Defence and Innovation Act. It ensures no foreign contractor can own, override, or duplicate Burkina Faso's UAV systems. One clause was added by Sarah Nadari: we do not copy others, we protect what we build. The law passes with 100% approval. Purpose, political consolidation. Tone, assertive, strategic sovereignty. 800 to logic. The chamber was full, but there was no sound. No reporters crowded the back row. No media feed ran outside the marble walls. No music played over the speakers. Parliament met that morning not for ceremony, but for definition. Every member had received the bill 2 days earlier. No amendments were proposed. No debate was scheduled. It was called simply the Autonomous Defence and Innovation Act. Sarah Nadari stood alone at the centre table, hands clasped behind her back. She wore a simple dark dress. No jewelry, no party pin. She wasn't speaking for a party that day. She was speaking for something bigger. The bill before you, Sarah Nadari said quietly, is not merely a response. It is a declaration. It affirms that all present and future military innovations designed, built, or operated within the sovereign territory of Burkina Faso shall remain exclusively under national control. The chamber was still. No foreign contractor shall own, override, replicate, or remotely influence any defense system developed on our soil. No data shall be hosted off-continent. No targeting algorithm shall be built with foreign audit access, and no intellectual property derived from our labs shall be exported without public consent. She let that hang for a moment. One delegate from the Northeast District shifted in his seat but said nothing. Serenadari turned a page. Clause 23 was added this morning. It states, "We do not copy others. We protect what we build." She paused. That line will not be edited, ever. In the second row, an elder statesman who had served through 4 presidencies cleared his throat but did not speak. He simply folded his arms and nodded once. Captain Trayore sat silently in the observation gallery above behind thick glass. He didn't wear a suit, just a light brown tunic and black sandals. He leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the chamber floor, listening to the rhythm of a country deciding who it would be next. Serenadari closed the folder in front of her. "I ask for no applause, only your vote." She stepped away from the podium. The Speaker of the Assembly rose slowly, his robe trailing behind him. "Members of Parliament," he began, "you have heard the motion. All in favour, raise your hand." Hands went up. Every single one. No one abstained. No one objected. The Speaker looked around, lips tight. "Motion carried. The Autonomous Defence and Innovation Act is hereby law." The chamber didn't cheer. It didn't rise. There was no clapping, just a long shared breath, as if something fragile but necessary had finally clicked into place. Serenadari returned to her seat, hands still steady. The woman beside her whispered, "Did you expect full approval?" "No," she replied calmly. "But I expected we were ready." In the gallery above, Traoré stood and walked away without a word. Outside, under the shade of the national flag, a boy played with a toy plane made from scrap wire and bottle caps. His sister threw it into the air and shouted, "You can't see it, it's invisible." Their father watched and smiled. He hadn't heard what had just passed in Parliament. But in his eyes, something else passed down. A quiet assurance that the sky no longer belonged to others. Inside the ministry, a technician began encrypting the new law into a central offline archive. The clause from Serenadari was highlighted in gold. He read it twice before locking the file. "We do not copy others. We protect what we build." And somewhere in a distant capital, a Western contractor opened his inbox, read the news, and stared at the screen for a long time before muttering, "They've sealed the gate." Yes, they had. A year later, a new wing opens inside the National Museum of Burkina Faso. It holds no weapons, only drone blueprints, photos of engineers, letters from villagers, and a single monitor replaying the first strike. Children stare in silence. The title of the exhibit, "We Were Never Powerless." Purpose, legacy, education, reverence. Tone, reflective and generational pride. The wing opened without banners. No ribbon cutting, no brass band. Just a soft announcement placed in the middle pages of the State Gazette. New wing now open. National Museum of Innovation and Memory. The official name wasn't the one people used. They called it the Museum of Silence. The building sat at the edge of Ouagadougou, tucked behind a row of trees and surrounded by a low stone wall. The front entrance bore no logo, just a single etched phrase above the door in Moray. "To listen is to remember." Inside, the air was cool, dim. The floors were made of polished red earth, the kind used in village courtyards. It grounded the entire place, like stepping into something old and sacred. There were no weapons on display. No missiles, no drones, no models of destruction. Instead, the first wall showed a series of photographs. 20 of them. Engineers in jumpsuits, girls welding stabilizers, boys coating components on cracked laptops by candlelight, their eyes focused, determined. No one posed. No one smiled for the camera. The work spoke for itself. At the center of the room, a display table held authentic blueprints. Worn, marked with fingerprints, smudged margins, coffee stains, circles around the word stability and underlines beneath autonomy. Children leaned over the glass, trying to read the diagrams, pointing out where the engines connected, where the signal boosters curved. Next came the letters. Dozens, printed and framed. One from the mother in the southern village. "You heard me when no one else did." One from a teacher. "The girls in my classroom now dream of becoming engineers before they dream of nurses." One from a soldier. "For the first time, we didn't lose the first shot." A recording of Serenadari's voice played on loop in a small side room. Her speech from the parliamentary session, recorded in a low but steady tone. We do not copy others. We protect what we build. Visitors stood still while it played. No one checked their phones. Then came the room with the screen. Not large, just a single monitor mounted on a black wall. The footage played on a loop, slow and stripped of sound. The first drone strike from above. High altitude. 12 trucks, heat signatures glowing red. Then, flash. One truck gone, another flash, then a third. But there was no explosion sound, no music, no commentary, only silence. Children watched with wide eyes. Some sat cross-legged on the floor. One little boy whispered, "It looks like lightning." Beside the screen, a quote carved into bronze. They never imagined we'd answer from the sky. In a corner of the exhibit stood a small sculpture, unannounced, with no artist listed. Just a cracked village radio placed atop a bronze hand, open and reaching, holding the voice that warned the nation. People lingered there longest. At the back of the wing was a blank wall with only one sentence painted in black. We were never powerless. We were just unheard. Visitors left quietly, speaking in low tones. Some held their children's hands a little tighter. Others took photos, not to post. That afternoon, a school group visited. The guide, a young woman named Zara, asked, "Why do you think it's called the Museum of Silence?" A girl in front, no more than 10, raised her hand, "Because the world was loud when we were quiet. But now they're quiet." Zara nodded. "Yes, that's part of it." That night, as the lights dimmed and the last visitors left, a security guard made his final round through the wing. He paused at the wall of letters, placed a hand on the frame of the one signed simply, Nara Tavi. Stood there for a long while before walking on. The museum didn't close in the usual sense. It simply exhaled and waited for the next voice to step in. Trayore walks alone near the very field where the first UAV launched. The red dirt is quiet now. Farmers have returned. Children play nearby. He picks up a small stone shaped like an arrowhead. He doesn't smile. He doesn't speak. He simply stands watching his people live without fear. And then he walks away. The field where the sun rose. It was early, the kind of early that still held a chill in the air and dew on the grass. No convoy, no alarms. Just a quiet stretch of red earth, soft beneath the feet, stretching toward the horizon in all directions. The birds called out first. Then the laughter of children echoed faintly across the field, like a memory returning home. Captain Ibrahim Trayore stood alone at the edge of the hill. No guards, no ceremony. He had told no one he would be here. Below him, the clearing where the first UAV had launched 1 year ago now looked unrecognizable. What had once been an improvised airstrip carved by hand, hidden from satellites, was now a patchwork of farmland and millet rows. The tire tracks were gone. Seedlings had taken their place. Near the edge, a family tended goats. A small boy chased his younger sister with a cloth kite, laughing wildly. The field had healed itself. Trayore stepped forward, his boots sinking slightly into the earth. He walked without direction, letting his eyes trace every inch of the land. His hand brushed the tops of the taller grass, still wet with dew. His shoulders carried no visible weight. But his silence felt heavy. This place had held fire, decisions, history. Now it held life. Midway through the field, he stopped. Something at his feet caught the light. A small stone, sharp on one end, dull on the other. He bent slowly and picked it up. It was shaped like an arrowhead. Maybe centuries old, maybe not. It didn't matter. He turned it in his palm, weightless, yet full of meaning. Behind him, a distant tractor rumbled to life. Ahead, 2 girls in school uniforms crossed the field, books balanced on their heads. One looked up, saw him, then quickly looked down again. They giggled and walked faster. He didn't wave, he didn't call out. He simply stood, watching his people, unhurried, unwatched, finally unafraid. A rooster crowed in the distance. A gentle breeze tugged at his shirt's hem. The arrowhead lay quiet in his hand. His thumb traced its edge once before he closed his fist around it. He glanced up at the sun rising behind soft clouds. No words, no final speech, just the stillness of a man who had fulfilled his purpose and knew the time to step aside had come. Traoré turned and walked, first across the field, then beyond it. He left footprints in the dew-soft red earth where tomorrow's crops would grow. The laughter drifted behind him, mingling with birdsong, sunlight warming the land he'd helped protect. His figure receded into dawn's glow, leaving life to unfold beneath an open sky, unseen, unannounced but secure. This was never just a story about drones or defense. It was a story about Traoré, a man who never asked for power but carried its weight with quiet resolve. He didn't fight for glory, but for the right of his people to live without fear. No applause, no spotlight, just silence, action and legacy. What do you think of Captain Traoré? Was he a soldier, a visionary, or something more? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this, ones that matter. Your support helps these voices echo a little further. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. Until next time, take care, keep thinking, and never forget, even the quietest actions can shape history. See you soon.